Jim Joyce.
Here we
I
are.
know, I know we promised an audience that, when we sort of came back, that we're coming back, right? But it's, we have successfully stayed consistently inconsistent.
Right, which fits. I mean, one is we're meticulously unproduced,
Unproduced.
so consistently inconsistent. And then the second thing is, it is Europe, it is summertime. You can't lower the bar, man.
Uh,
Lower the bar.
Fair enough, but we're a U.S. business. I'm trying to reach
Exactly.
people anyway, so we gotta keep moving. But this is
Awesome.
great, man. It's been a while, and I know that last time, you were
I was
picking
making
some
you
stuff
introduce
up.
yourself. I was making
Oh,
you introduce yourself, set it up.
too late for that. I'm Eugene Berhovich, co-host of the Shout of Digital Health Therapy. Welcome to this week's episode with Jim Joyce, and we have a guest
Well done.
waiting. So. But very briefly, before we let our awesome guest in,
Yep.
last we left off, I don't know, weeks ago, we saw each other in Amsterdam at Health. Shout
Yep.
out to the team, and you announced something. So just give us very quick, thirty
Sure.
second startup pitch.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so yeah, as you know, I've launched a company called Clear IP, and and it's a little broader than just med tech. We're doing lots of work in the med tech space, but Clear IP is it's a technology platform that is leveraging all the things that you would expect today if you're building a company. So artificial intelligence and large language models to allow innovators, entrepreneurs, people like yourself to actually patent new inventions right from their mobile phones. So we're deep in the technology, but we announced at, I think, a Dublin Tech Summit a few months ago, um, the details of what we're building, and then at Health we were sharing it with there. So we're kind of a little out of stealth, and we're kind of building this technology, but it's really to kind of rethink about the whole invention and patent process for inventors like ourselves as they're building new inventions. So that's it. So I'm knee deep in it.
I
It's nice to
I
be young again.
download something. I put my idea concept in, and then go all the way through patent filing in that process. That's the
That's it.
idea.
You said
Okay.
it better than I did. Yeah. So it's that concept of we all have, lots of people have brilliant ideas, novel ideas, sometimes silly ideas, whatever those are. You need a safe place to store them, keep them, and then when you're ready to do something with them, we want to help you turn those into really valuable intellectual property, by interacting with you around those ideas. So it's still a little early, but it's a cool project. So pretty pumped about it.
Amazing. Well, kudos and rooting for you as always. So, on this note, in case you need some innovation banking for your new project, I'm going to let in a good friend, letting in Dom Kennerson. So, Dom and I was just calculating, it's been almost 5 years, believe it or not, outside of Bayer. And it's now, oh, you're gonna have to zoom right in, Dom. There we go.
There we
Fancy.
go.
This is out of the 140 plus episodes. This is the fanciest entry that I've ever seen. Welcome.
The Death Star.
Death Star, exactly. So
Oh, dude, that's awesome.
I was just sort of, I was just doing some math.
Yeah,
It's crazy that I've been out of Big Bear for now almost 5 years ish. I mean, not quite, but somewhat. And then I was there for almost four. So it sounds like we've known each other for almost a decade. I'm aging us, so
oh wow,
right?
wow, time
Haven't thought about it.
flies.
I know time
Yeah,
flies. Some of us
yeah, it
still
has
have
flown by
hair like Jim. Some of us don't, but
but we all like the beard, right? I mean, ever since you switched over to the beard, it's been
sure.
Eugene.
For
Yeah,
sure, for sure. But anyway, you guys have met, I'm sure, through multitude of events. Frontiers, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I
maybe.
don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I've heard good things, so I'm dying to
Much
hear
Jim has
more.
more.
bad memory anyway, so even if you did, but
Right, right. No chance.
for our millions of listeners and viewers, Dom, take it away. Take us through your life history, as short or as long as you want. We got time.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, well, I mean, I was actually thinking about one of the episodes you had on recently with Bryan Sivak.
Oh
Maybe
yeah,
that's a good place to start,
yeah. Let's do it.
because I think it was so interesting to hear his story and hear about Washington, D.C. And I was in DC somewhere around that same time, right? And I think my shot of digital health has kind of started in that nexus, from a number of different kind of vantage points. And I had always loved healthcare, was always into healthcare. And what happened was Steve Case had Revolution Health. And I was working in a hospital when I first heard about Revolution Health, and someone just kind of told me about it. And to just put it in context for maybe some of the younger people in your audience, I mean, like he was Mark Zuckerberg
I
before
think we
Mark
have many.
Zuckerberg.
We got a very particular audience. No,
Yeah,
Okay.
but
Then
to
Jill's
the
trying to
young
do
ones.
dial-up. They're doing dial-up right now. They're trying to get on
Exactly.
the.
Exactly.
We're gonna have to do some cuts of this for TikTok, and then we'll get, But anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, anyway.
exactly. But yeah, I was just kind of fascinated by it. And I remember he just had it was almost like a brochure and a logo and doing healthcare. And I was like, what's that? And I was on Craigslist and saw a job ad for a position at Revolution Health. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. And it was so different from what I was doing. I mean, so I applied for the job. I got called that afternoon. I interviewed the next day. On my way home, I had a job offer. It was like very real
boom.
startup, very real kind of, that whole
Fast pace.
environment, right?
Yeah,
That whole
yeah.
space. And yeah, so I worked at Revolution Health for about 3 years, $300 million startup. A number of people kind of debate me, like Matthew Holt always debates me on how much it was. I'm like, Matthew, I worked there.
But that's Matthew. He'll
That's
debate
Matthew.
no matter what. So we'll
Right.
we'll love him for that. Yeah.
The fact that we mentioned him, we're going to get slated later on anyway.
Sure.
He always has something to say about that.
Yeah.
But that was, I think, my first real shot of digital health. And for lack of better words, I mean, I think it's easy to say we failed miserably, but I think it was a fail forward. And I think to even categorize it as a failure, I don't think it's fair, right? Because it would be the perfect kind of company now, kind of around content, coverage, care. It was at least 10 years ahead of its time.
Yep.
But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot. I met a lot of people. And, being able to work in that environment at that time of my life, I was still in my 20s, was completely amazing. Yeah. So
Yeah. So
that was my
we
first
got.
shot of digital health. Yeah.
Well, Jim is rejoining because apparently he froze. I didn't even realize it. But where did you actually grow up? Like, where were you born and grew up?
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
was it
I
DC?
was, Jim's back.
Yeah, his laptop died, I guess. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Okay.
born on an army base. I don't know if you know this, Eugene.
No, I don't.
Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas.
Ah,
That's
look at
where I
that.
was born. But my mom is from DC, and that's where I really grew up. But I think, well, she was in the army when she had me. And yeah,
Yeah, I thought your roots were in DC. That's why. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
gotcha.
Yeah, you were very specific with the born.
Yeah,
Born on dating.
but most people ignore my specificity. So
I lived in Germany too long, Eugene.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
All right, so keep moving. Revolution's Health. You
Yeah.
had quite an experience working for Steve Case, I'm sure, as well. And
Yeah, and I mean, I think yeah, soon after it was a bit of that post-startup esoteric kind of a space that you're in, right? Because I just worked for one of the biggest entrepreneurs of the 20th century. Everyone working there thought that they were going to cash out on their stock options, didn't happen. But once you have that entrepreneurial bug, you just don't, it's like with you. So I started consulting in DC, had a pretty interesting client book. The Children's Hospital um, was also working for a large health and wellness platform. At the time, it was called Spark People. It's called something else today. And there was also, I started working with pharma companies through a group called Crier Health, which I think your US audience may know Donna Crier a little bit. She runs the National Liver Foundation. And she's kind of was one of the first big kind of patient advocates in the US. So I was doing some work for Donna and Dennis. And yeah, and that was my like day job, you know, to keep the lights on. And I would also bartend like 3, 4 nights a week, right on Capitol Hill at this like French gypsy eclectic kind of a bar called Wisdom. And at the time, it was one of the few bars in DC that served absinthe. So it was like this very speakeasy vibe with like $15 cocktails. And this is like, I don't know what year is this. This is like 2009-ish,
Yeah.
2010-ish. You know, I mean, so $15 for a cocktail was pretty pricey.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that, like
But
working
good
in that
tips.
bar, was
Good
that
tips. I'm sure good tips.
good tips. On a good night, I would get, you know, about $400 in tips.
Yeah.
Which was pretty solid. Yeah, and one night we were talking about the Affordable Care Act, and everyone worked for some congressperson. And I just done some work for a client, I think it was Sanofi, and just kind of outlined the act and some parts that they should look out for. And this one, several people at the bar were like, Dom, how do you know this? You just made me an apple martini. Like, what is this? And this one guy was just super curious. He's like, Dom, you got to check out this fellowship. It'll take you to Germany. You'll get to learn the language. You'll get a tax-free stipend. Berlin.
It's a
I'm
win,
like,
win, 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 win.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I'm like, that sounds like fun. And you know, I do have like a bucket list. It was like checking off 3, 4, 5 things on my bucket list all at the same time. Like living
Yeah.
in a different country, learning a different language, getting paid in a different currency. I'm like, oh, you know, where do I sign up? So the fellowship was the Robert Bosch Fellowship.
Lasses
So you still, well, yeah, exactly. Schnell los gehen. So yeah, so I got the fellowship, and it was one of those like life things, right? Because I interviewed for the fellowship, and you know, about a week had gone past, and I was on my way to a job interview in Georgetown, DC, for like it's a pretty high level job, like an executive director of a nonprofit, you know, and I'm like, oh, you know, and I had like that would have been, I think, a $3 million kind of a budget. I'm like, oh, this would be fun. And as soon as I pull up to the interview, I get an alert on my BlackBerry, right? Like, congratulations, you got the Bosch Fellowship. And I'm like, whoa. And it just kind of
Nice.
hit me that I'm moving to Germany. And I go to this interview with the board, and I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, but I just got this email, and we talked about the Autobahn, I think, for the next 30 minutes, you know, and that sent me on my way. But yeah, I moved to Berlin, and yeah, I mean, you know how Berlin is. Yeah,
Sorry, just one thing for the younger audience. A BlackBerry is the old version of this. Just a little intro.
exactly. I'm putting it into historical context with the BlackBerry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm making, like, you got great references here. So I go from Craigslist to Steve Casey to a
Yep.
speakeasy bar to a BlackBerry.
Right. I'm ancient at this point. Yeah, and the fellowship was amazing. I mean, my German, I took like this immersive course. I was up to speed probably like 4 months. So it was like 4 hours a day in a group setting. Wednesdays I had a one-on-one, as well as what they call like a tandem partner, you know, and Like it was like up to speed. And then my first work experience was with the GK-File Spitzenverband. So this was the group that was working with all of the German public sick funds. And at the time they were working on the health technology assessments. So like the first HTA in Europe.
Yeah.
And I got to like see that firsthand, which was like phenomenal. And it was like a very German environment. So I think like I was at peak German speaking, you know, like December, I guess that was December 2010 or so, because I like had to write in German, like policy reports in German, you know,
Whoa.
which at Bayer, you know, our
Yeah.
language was English, right? Yeah.
And your education was in policy? Or not?
No. Good question. So I left that part out, right? And
Not
so,
rewinding you back, but just, you know, briefly.
Yeah, what happened, so I mentioned I was working in a hospital, and I was one of those people, I did hospital management, right? So like an MBA for healthcare. And what happened was when I was in undergraduate school at South Carolina State, I realized somewhere around organic chemistry and, you know, one of those calculus classes where they stop using numbers and it's just like symbols. And I'm like, what am I doing here, right? And I just figured there had to be a better way instead of going to medical school if I wanted to work in healthcare. So I found this phenomenal healthcare management program really focused on experiential learning. And yes, I did my master's at Washington, DC. And as part of that program, you had to do a management fellowship or like a management residency, actually, is what we called it. So I worked in every single unit inside of a hospital from like, you know, I spent a day in the cafeteria looking at how they prepare food to cleaning services to, you know, operations, eventually the C-suite, you know, and just get to see how all of those components kind of fit together. But when you work in hospitals, a part of you, you're absolutely connected to policy, right? You're connected to Medicare, you're connected to Medicaid, you're connected to state, local, and sometimes county politics all at the same time. And so I used to, even during that residency period, I mean, I had to, I guess, in some ways be an advocate for the hospital, right?
Mm.
So, and I think being in DC, you are always, to some degree, into politics, whether you want to be or not. It's like living in Brussels, right? Like that's just part of your DNA at that point.
Right.
But no, I never had a formal kind of a policy role until later on at Bayer. Yeah.
So let's fast forward to big pharma, right? You've sort of navigated and you know, through the big pharma, but let's keep moving. Kind of what are the things that you sort of picked out of those years? Because you've also, you know, went through a number of roles there, right?
Yeah, I was I was at Bayer for 9 years, held 3 roles, and you know, someone that we have in common, someone that introduced us, Jessica Federer. Her mantra to me, I don't know if she would remember this, but what she said to me when I got into Bayer, she said, look, Dom, this is how you manage your career at a company like Bayer. Your first year, work your butt off. Your second year, have fun. Your third year, look for your new job inside of Bayer. And my career kind of unfolded that way, you know, so I started doing global communications for the animal health unit. And so like 5% of my job is looking at cat videos on YouTube, like legit, who are the celebrity cats? I need to know who they are, you know? And
that reminds me that this morning there's a new Barry's opened up near us. So we go and, you know, anybody who knows Barry's, it's like, you know, 10-minute, you know, running. And that 10-minute running was split into like basically like 3 sections of 3 minutes with a sprint at the end of each one. So it sounds like Dom's career this morning, but squeezed into 10 minutes.
Exactly. Well, it's hard to call a German work environment a sprint, right? I mean,
Yeah, true.
it's a marathon, but very much like that, you know.
Right.
And then I moved over to the policy side, which was awesome. And I think we probably met somewhere around that time.
Yeah.
And so I was part of the global policy team or the public affairs team at Bayer. And essentially what that means, the way I used to think about it was like being a corporate diplomat, right? So look at news, information, media, figure out based on what we have inside of the company, how we should think about it, how we should think about it in a responsible way, how we should think about it in an ethical way, how we should think about it in a future way to protect the business or plan for the business, right? And so I had a remit for like IP, trade topics, firefighting from Canada to Argentina. Yeah.
Dom, I do remember, yes, we were introduced early as soon as I entered by Jess, right? But where we got really engaged is talk about policy when we with the team signed with the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. We're like, we need a go-getter, awesome person to represent us in the front lines there, right? And I think that's how,
right.
Yeah. And look,
Yeah.
hopefully I'll do an episode of the DTX podcast on this, but CMS, physician fee schedule for 2025 includes digital therapeutic reimbursement for mental health. So, we were early once again, Dom, but hey.
Yeah.
Right. But
it takes about 10 years for everything to catch up, Eugene, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It feels like 2 years too late for a lot of companies, right?
Also true. Different podcast people, different podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So Megan Coder, and we collaborated quite a bit, I think, even after you left, to be sure. So that relationship, I mean, Bear was one of the founding members of the Alliance.
We were the first, I think, pharma company, but
Exactly.
we always reminisce. But yeah, and maybe just I do want to fast forward to today, but I think part of working kind of with the startup world, right, and sort of innovation banking will transition into what are the things that sort of you picked up, right? And I'll maybe just throw in something that to me, innovation, especially in big pharma, needs to actually mean something within P&L. That's my big takeaway personally, right? It has to have a P&L impact ultimately. But I'm curious, I know we've sort of crossed paths, within the G4A and the digital health, but as you picked up the flag, right? Or baton.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think G4A had its own kind of innovation journey, right? And I think from its roots, it was something, it had its intent. And when you were there, it had what it needed to have. And then at my point in time, it had what it needed to have. And so I went into G4A with a very humble hat. I mean, no one wants to follow Eugene or Sue in a job at all.
Or the reverse, it might be easier.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it was, so for me, I wanted to basically try to put in structure that would just make G4A run on autopilot, no matter who was there, And I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but to say, okay, like, for example, if you look at the G4A LinkedIn, they have like their weekly kind of ecosystem summary, just something really easy, engage, put out some data, and I still kind of refer to it, because it's deal coverage. And if I'm interested in deals or who's being funded or financed, I know their process well enough that they're going to capture most of what's out there, right? And there were things like that outside that people see. There were also things inside. I think it was also really interesting because it was during the pandemic, when I joined. And that pandemic era of Zooms all day, networking all day, where healthcare, everyone on the planet at that time was like a novice virologist pretty much, right? Where the entire market was just tuned to healthcare, what we're doing in healthcare. And so that pandemic position, I think, was, a thing. P&L, yes, I think, of course, I'm trying to pick the right words, but
Why not?
I think that kind of a unit inside of a pharma company has to have like really an exco seat or at least a deal committee seat.
Yep.
To be able to decide when everything comes through that filter and when everything comes through the funnel, what to actually prioritize and how to prioritize it and position it. Because if you have your digital health experts at, these two layers of a pharma company and you don't have them at that decision-making layer, this layer doesn't know how to operationalize any of this. So you need this to be able to manage the pieces to actually make this work. And that hasn't really, I think, happened in pharma. And I mapped some of this out years ago. I think that's kind of what helped me get into G-Freight, because I think at the time, some pharma companies had like this digital kind of a leader or digital transformation. And like, that's still typically too fluffy and it's not really on rails to be able to track inside of an organization. And I think—
Did you find?
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you find? I don't know if my sound is okay here, but did you guys spend time looking at how other pharma companies, either one of you, were actually building it? Did you spend a lot of time, a little bit of time, or just aware of that?
Yeah. So part of what I did, I mapped out like a 5-dimension kind of a model for how pharma should think about how you really look at pharma through a digital lens. So mapped out, okay, what does IP look like? How much are you spending on R&D? Where's your IT? Do you have in-house IT? Have you outsourced your IT? Which says a lot about culture, right? Do you have enablers in your organization? Do you have actual specific digital roles? I mapped all of that out for kind of top 10 pharma.
You did a lot more. I looked at it. I followed Milind's one statement. I don't know if you guys know Milind, but it's, are we trying to make things better or make better things? With this unit, right? It was pretty binary. And then, yes, I agree, right? Obviously, stakeholder management as well. But it's interesting, Jim, right? I think people were asking me, within Bayer, kind of what are other pharma companies doing, right? And I think, in general, pharma are, fast followers of each other, right? There's no one leaping, even though there's leaps, from that at least digital perspective. So we can probably talk for like 3 hours just on that alone. Maybe I should start a podcast on that, Jim. What do you think?
How far?
We have like at least 2 podcast topics now.
And if you guys were to think about this now, imagine if so we have 2 leaders in Bayer's digital pharma ecosystem here. Their heads must be turned upside down with what's going on with AI right now. Or how do you think they're reacting to that?
Well, so actually I think Bayer is probably more prepared than one would think. And maybe, so to toot my own horn a little bit. So when I was on the policy side, this is maybe back in 2019, the World Health Organization and the World IP Organization were already asking questions around patentability for AI. And I noticed this. I took it to different industry associations and organizations, say, hey, we should probably have a position on this. And everyone was like, maybe, maybe not. Fast forward, right? So I developed a position paper through kind of the Bayer channels. It took about a year to get the paper approved.
Wow.
Wow.
And over 100 people kind of reviewed this paper, and it was the first kind of biopharma publicly available paper on AI. What that paper then did, I know, is it pretty much PHRMA, so the trade association in the US, they then developed like a working group for AI. So in part, based upon that response, based upon a few other policy responses. And I think even now, Bear is probably ahead of most companies when it comes to that, because in that forum, we actually had something to say, years ago before Chat GPT. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I think in general,
And what
though,
was
a
the
lot
big?
of, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
No, go ahead. No, please.
I was saying, I think in general, and I know Dom and I had these discussions, right? Leveraging, how much can you get into the pipeline, and that's where AI. So from an R&D perspective and molecular discovery, right? That's where, and I know Bayer and many other pharma companies have been investing pretty heavily, right? I mean, I think at one point, before I even left, we calculated the AI in somewhere in the drug discovery space. There were at that point in time like 150 plus companies, right, taking pieces of the supply chain, if you will, right?
Right.
And that's where the real money is, right? That's where pharma makes money. It still makes money on the pills and the drugs,
The research
right?
side.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
no brainer.
No, exactly.
All right, so let's fast forward. You decided to move on after the 3 different marathons,
Yeah.
not sprints. You
Yeah.
went to good old SVB.
Yeah. January last year, January 2023. Yeah.
Wow, perfect timing. Perfect timing.
Right. It's perfect. Couldn't have planned it better. Yeah. Yeah. And the bank imploded, collapsed, however you want to look at it. I guess it's mid-March 2023. And to be fair, I think what's important for this audience is it's a very different situation in the UK than in the US, right?
Okay.
So in the US, it was a saga. Here in the UK, it was a weekend, and it was a very challenging time for our clients, for the employees here at the bank. And that weekend, I heard from you, Eugene. I heard from a lot of people, that checked in. To be fair, I had probably some interviews kind of lined up by that Sunday. And then Monday morning, it was, HSBC just bought Silicon
Here's a
Valley Bank UK.
here's a
Yeah.
pound.
Yeah,
Here's
for a
one
symbolic
pound.
£1. And and I think to be, taken over or to be acquired by, what people refer to as a tier 1 bank with a legacy. And I think, the group CEO had a very real vision, and a vision that kind of went back to something he saw, in Hong Kong, with like the first charter was to support small businesses, that language is in there. And so there was a compelling reason, there was a functional reason. And I think here in the UK, once I believe the UK government realized that every innovative company in the UK was connected to this bank in some way, they said, oh, yeah, someone should probably step in and buy it. And I think what I've heard the story retold from HSBC leadership is that's the opportunity that they saw, and the bank is thriving. And I think I'm still surprised by, despite all the branding and everything else, I mean, people are still really learning about HSBC Innovation Banking and kind of what we do. And we still have to unpack that for people quite a bit. And so for this audience, I think, the bank, it's the legacy of Silicon Valley Bank, but so you have the bank that focuses on venture-backed companies in high growth, high IP verticals, right? Life sciences and healthcare, fintech, climate tech, frontier tech, clean tech, consumer tech, you name it. And
Yeah.
and they hire people like me with industry expertise to perform a few different functions, right? In part to be that ambassador diplomat with the ecosystem. It's also in part based on the bank's model, to help inform the teams inside the bank how to think about different companies, different spaces, trends in the spaces, which essentially help de-risk, what we do as a bank. And what we do at the end of the day, it's kind of three very clear pillars. Safe place to park your money with a tier one bank that pretty much has an asset sheet that's about the size of most of South America. We provide financing and debt solutions, so for a venture-backed company or a loss-making company to actually have a credit card is sometimes a big deal, even if you do have, other providers. But we also provide venture debt. And then there's kind of value add. And that value add is CEOs or CFOs just asking me questions, throwing spaghetti on the wall. It can be what I've been doing a lot of lately is introducing people to like different kind of, I wouldn't call them service providers, but very close colleagues with the right solution at the right time. So for example, someone wants to commercialize with the NHS, I know someone that can do that. If someone is looking for FDA help, I know someone in DC that can do that, like the former #2 at FDA. I mean, in this kind of ecosystem, I wouldn't call it ecosystem management, but the advantage that we have as a bank that I didn't have at Barry, even though, in roles, and even you, Eugene, I mean, you know everybody, you talk to everybody. I can only imagine the rumors that you do.
There's not enough hours in the day, damn it.
Right. But like, we have real information, we have real data, so we see the fundraisers that never get announced. We know the companies that market big everywhere, but don't have any money. We know companies in a very intimate way, and it helps, I think, keep a different kind of a pulse on the market in terms of what's actually happening in real time.
Yeah, 100%. And if you think, just building off of that, give us your take. I mean, this is such a fascinating time in this kind of ecosystem of digital healthcare in terms of investments, in terms of people raising money, in terms of who's stuck in the mud, who's getting momentum. What are you seeing? What's interesting out there if you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, you've heard the mantras, right? The mantra right now is, so like, for example, the 2023 mantra is everyone's going to raise money in Q4. That never happened, right? The 2024 mantra has been cash flow break even. Everyone is trying to get to EBITDA positivity, which makes sense. These companies should make money, right? I think this is also investors that have done different kind of extensions, trying to really like get these companies to flip, be creative, do some different things. I think also, yeah, I mean, everything that you, I think, read in reports like Rock Health or Yale Growth or in the Innovation Banking report, those things are true, even though they look back. So we have seen a lot of activity. We have seen less unlabeled, less unannounced rounds. I think what has changed are the value pools, so whereas I think the last few years, we talked a little bit about the manufacturing space, right? Or kind of the drug design. I think for 2024, a lot of that is in a different place than it was, so it's not as well funded. You see, I think, really big fundings around the metabolic space, right? You see a lot of funding around provider operations. I think the metabolic space is fascinating. We talked about pharma, and I think that pharma is at this huge inflection point because 10, 15 years ago, they all focused on rare disease and cancer, and things that could be reimbursed at $2 million a year for one course of treatment. And now all of a sudden you have companies like Novo that are the #1 value company in all of Europe, right? And it's like, where did that come from? And they're focused on
I'm getting
a
200 million Americans at $1,000 a pop a month. Right? So,
there you go, right?
Right.
And
and
it's
that's just
like,
America.
but if you look at that through, you know, a population health or through a different lens, it's okay. They actually went back to thinking about an actual issue, you know, of like weight loss, you know, or chronic disease management. And then there are all of these kind of comorbid areas where these drugs are kind of touching base. And so you see that now, I think, playing out in the digital health space. And I think we've talked about this a little bit, Eugene, you know, with,
Yeah.
you know, companies that help distribute or kind of package these drugs that are kind of digitally based, right? I've had this conversation also with like the health community, you know, because I think if you look at a pure digital therapeutic company versus what one of these other kind of companies do, like this DTX company went through a lot of kind of clinical rigor, whereas this more consumer facing company didn't have to do all of that. And their top line is developing at a much higher rate than your DTX company, right?
But do you see at the seed stage, you know, at the seed, you know, is there anything interesting happening at the seed stage or, you know, are you have any visibility on the digital health tech side? Like what areas?
Yeah, I think you see a lot of kind of clinical decision support. I mean, kind of in those areas that I already mentioned, right? So provider
Okay.
operations.
Yeah.
And it's different, I think, a little bit from region to region or from
Yep.
country to country, you know,
Okay.
whereas here, everyone is trying to figure out how to keep people out of the National Health Service, right? So keep people out of the NHS. In the US, it's something different that people are trying to, you know, either navigate the actual healthcare system.
Cool.
Most of my work focuses on scale ups and growth companies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And I was going to ask you, because I know I saw something fly by, and I'll be frank, I didn't download it, but the fact that in UK, and I think it was health tech, but maybe broader, that
Yeah.
it kind of passed the Series A chasm.
right. Yeah. So what happened? So you know, when you have like this global hat on at a company like Bayer, like once you're in a sized market, you see different things, you hear different things. And this guy last year's like, oh, well, Dom, we were talking about how companies, once they hit a Series A in the UK, how it seems like they don't know where to get a Series B,
Right.
you know? And this guy said, well, yeah, that's the post-Series A chasm. I'm like, what? Like, people know about that? And that's an actual thing? And he's like, yeah, his name's Henry Taysom. And I started talking to other people in London about it and in the UK about it. They're like, oh yeah, like it's one of those things that everyone in this space knows, but no one has put data around it. People talk about it a little bit, but like not really. Yeah, and there's a download link. I think the blog, to be fair, is a bit wordy. But the
All you need
download
to do
link
is
at the
look at the
bottom is
picture and
look
ask
at the picture.
ChatGPT to summarize it. That's it.
There you
That's what I
go.
do these days.
But the
So
PowerPoint
for
is
the
actually
viewers,
much
not the
better.
listeners, we'll add the link as well. But it's a nice chart for those who
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what that really shows, well, there's a better chart, seriously, in the download in the PowerPoint, because it really shows that how UK investors participate up to Series A, and then there does seem to be a bit of a cutoff, or I think it's a double-digit kind of a drop-off from Series A to Series B. And what's interesting about that drop-off is that EU funds don't typically pick up, and US funds do. And so what that means is that if you are a founder, you probably have to think about an international syndicate sooner than you thought you did. I also think it means that companies in Europe especially, and in the UK especially, have to think about what growth looks like to a US investor in a different way. Because
Yeah,
if
100%.
if I have a company connected to the NHS that's doing less than 10 million ARR, you know, no one in the US is going to care. That's not going to get me a Series B, right?
Right.
And that's
It's
the
so
switch that has to flip.
Yeah, it's so interesting because all these, you know, you have to be so, especially in a competitive environment where, you know, maybe that Series B isn't quite, you know, there's still proof points and there's some, you know, all of your credentialing and your traction inside those markets, the kind of clients that kind of turn heads in Europe don't always turn heads in the US. The pricing structure, you know, the kind of routes to market are different enough that you need to kind of re-explain it to that, you know, to these real expert focused US investors. So it makes a lot of sense. I have to say, it's so great that they have someone like you working in, like, I had such a I mean, SVB was so important to the ecosystem. You know, it was so important to the ecosystem. And the fact that HSBC has stepped in to kind of try to fill that in there because you just didn't have anything like it. So it's great to see. I know we have another friend that joined HSBC, right? Steve.
Shout out to Steve Agular, right? So
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to see some of that talent coming in and then them kind of going after and trying to support that ecosystem is just fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the crazy part is almost an hour already went by and we can still do 2 or 3 more hours. But why don't we go to Jim's, you know, famous question towards the end?
Ready? Am I coming across okay? I know I had to change.
Yeah, no, yeah. I know you got your detailed notes. Let's go, Jim Joyce.
Awesome. No, this is all fluid, all off the top of my head here. But
Meticulously unproduced.
Inconsistently consistent. So imagine yourself right now. You go back to DC, and then you get a note that says there's going to be a big alumni gathering of Robert Bosch fellows are gathering around this big convention, and you're being asked to speak at this convention. And you're in there and you're delivering, and people are asking to comment on a policy paper that you had written and the huge division that you had helped grow within the side HSBC. So you're delivering this keynote speech, and there's a young man in the audience, and he stops you and he says, I need to speak to you really, really quickly. He goes, you don't understand how our careers have tracked. I started off looking at Craigslist. It ended up getting me a venture capital job. And then I worked at a speakeasy bar, in an Egyptian speakeasy bar, where they were serving $23 cocktails. And that led me to do HT cat videos for an animal health division, to a sick fund in Germany. And then all the way back to it, like Forrest Gump, I was in SVB as it was all collapsing. I offered one of the most important jobs in the world in there. And now I'm starting my first digital healthcare company.
Wow.
Yeah. What's the one piece of advice you would give me as I'm starting that company?
My advice would be to understand what you're good at and what you're not, to hire people that can help you. You know, I think, it would just be that simple.
Love it.
Awesome. Love it. That's amazing.
Well, pleasure seeing you as always, and appreciate you joining. And for our listeners, you know, hit subscribe, pass it on, like it, and we'll see you maybe next week, maybe the week after. We're consistently inconsistent these days, so that's it.
I appreciate it.
And that was awesome. Amazing career.
Thanks.